Brian Mbeumo scores against Manchester City. The stadium erupts. Manchester United look like a team reborn. Then he scores against Arsenal. Again, the world takes notice. Then he shows up against Liverpool. And in those moments, Ambumo looks like one of the best forwards in this league. But then comes Crystal Palace. Then comes Newcastle away. And suddenly, the player who looked unplayable in the biggest games looks invisible in the ones that matter just as much. That is the story right now. That is the tension sitting at the heart of Manchester United's season. And what makes it even more fascinating is that it is not just Mbeumo's story. It is Michael Carrick's story too. These two men, the star player and the interim manager, are locked into the same pattern. They rise together for the big occasion, and they fade together when the lights dim slightly. Today, on United HQ, we are going to pull that thread completely. We are going to break down what is really happening with Brian Mbeumo, what it means for the direction of this club, and then we are going to pivot to one of the most quietly extraordinary stories in football right now, the full rehabilitation of Harry Maguire, a player who came in for £80 million, became a symbol of everything wrong with Manchester United, and is now being discussed as a contract priority in the summer of 2026. Stay with me, because both of these stories connect in ways that reveal something deep about where this club actually is right now. Let us start with the stakes, because they are significant. Manchester United have lost just one of their last 8 games. That is the number the club wants you to focus on. And to be fair, it is genuinely impressive for a club going through the kind of transitional period they are in right now. 1 loss in 8 under an interim manager against a Premier League field that has given no one an easy ride. But here is the problem with that number. It is a blunt instrument. It tells you the result, but it does not tell you the story behind the result. And when you look at the fixtures involved, when you look at who those wins came against and how they came, you start to see something concerning hiding inside an otherwise positive run. The reality for the club is that their most important player is running at 2 very different speeds depending on the occasion. And at this level, against the relentless demands of a Premier League schedule, a player who only turns up for the glamour fixtures is a luxury the squad simply cannot afford for much longer. The situation is this: Mbeumo has already hit double figures for goals scored, and Manchester United have played only 40 games in all competitions this season. Those are impressive numbers on the surface, but the distribution of those goals, and more importantly, the performances surrounding those goals, is where the real story lives. And if this pattern continues without correction, Michael Carrick faces a structural problem that no amount of brilliant preparation for big games will solve, because you do not win leagues or secure top 4 finishes on marquee moments alone. You win them in the grind, in the Tuesday night trips, in the blank performances against teams sitting deep at Old Trafford, in the games that do not have a narrative attached to them. And right now, both Mbeumo and Carrick are struggling in exactly those moments. Before we go deeper into the analysis, I want to take just a second to speak directly to you watching this. If you want this level of breakdown, this level of honest, detailed analysis on everything happening at Manchester United, without hype, without agenda, just the real picture, then hit that subscribe button right now. Join the United HQ community. We cover this club the way it deserves to be covered, with proper analysis, proper context, and proper respect for your intelligence as a fan. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and let us get back into this. Understanding what Brian Mbeumo actually is at Manchester United, the evidence suggests that Mbeumo was always going to be a player defined by his peak moments rather than his baseline contribution. That is not a criticism. There are players in every squad in every era who operate exactly like this. They are not your weekly 8 out of 10 performers. They are your 7-7-7 and then a 10 in the biggest game of the month player. And when the 10s come in the right games, it can feel like the most important player in the squad. And Mbeumo's 10s have come in astonishing games. Goals against Manchester City, a goal against Arsenal, contributions against Liverpool. These are not soft fixtures. These are the hardest possible tests the Premier League offers. And in those games, Mbeumo did not just participate. He was decisive. He was the difference. He was the reason Manchester United collected points they might not have otherwise collected. That is a remarkable quality. The ability to raise your performance level, specifically when the opposition is at their strongest, when the pressure is at its highest, when the stadium is at its loudest. A lot of players cannot do that. A lot of very good players, experienced players, well-paid players cannot find that extra gear in those moments. Mbeumo clearly can, but here is what is now becoming impossible to ignore. Those peaks are not raising the baseline, and the baseline is dropping. The situation is one where Mbeumo's performances in the less celebrated fixtures have become noticeably weaker as the season has progressed. The visit of Crystal Palace to Old Trafford, the uncomfortable trip to St James Park to face Newcastle, these are fixtures that carry real points. These are games that separate top four contenders from the teams just outside the conversation. And in those games, the version of Mbeumo that shows up is not the one who terrorised City or cut open Arsenal. It is a passenger version, a player who drifts, who cannot find the combinations, who looks like he is operating at perhaps 60 or 65% of his maximum output. The critical question is why? And the honest answer is that the article does not give us a definitive explanation because there may not be one clear answer yet. But what it does establish is two possible explanations, and both of them deserve serious consideration. The first possibility is a big game mentality issue in reverse. Not that Mbeumo lacks big game quality, clearly he does not, but that the psychological arousal he needs to perform at his best is only triggered by the very highest stakes. Smaller fixtures simply do not generate that trigger. The result is a player who is mentally present in the Champions League atmosphere game and mentally absent in the bread and butter fixture. This is not unique to Mbeumo. It is a documented pattern in elite sport, but it is a pattern that needs management and correction. The second possibility is a workload and fatigue issue. Mbeumo is trusted to play full games more often than not. He is kept on the pitch because of his capacity to produce that moment of magic at any point. Carrick backs him, the coaching staff back him, and so he plays and plays and plays. The situation is one where the very quality that keeps him on the pitch for 90 minutes is also the reason his overall contribution levels are dropping. The body and mind can only sustain those peaks so many times before the effort required to reach them leaves you depleted in the games in between. Neither explanation is damning on its own. Together, they paint a picture of a player who needs careful management and a structured conversation about how to get more consistency out of him across a full fixture list. Because the current situation is unsustainable. The evidence is clear. Once the marquee fixtures dried up, once the schedule moved from the Manchester derby to a mid-table clash, Mbeumo's impact dried up with it. And that is when Manchester United started to look exposed. Why this directly mirrors Michael Carrick's situation here is where it gets really interesting. Because the Mbeumo pattern is not happening in isolation. It is reflecting something in the manager's own coaching record at Old Trafford. Michael Carrick is currently the interim manager of Manchester United, and let us be clear about what he has achieved. 1 loss in 8 games is not luck. That is a man who knows how to set up a football team, knows how to motivate players, and knows how to get the best out of a dressing room. Nobody should dismiss that, but the same fingerprint that marks Mbeumo's season also marks Carrick's spell in the dugout. The big games bring out the best version of his Manchester United. The smaller games leave something to be desired. Carrick's team rise for the occasion when the occasion demands rising. The problem is that the Premier League does not let you choose which games to take seriously. It demands the same application, the same tactical sharpness, the same hunger, whether you are playing the reigning champions or a team battling to avoid the drop. Every point counts equally on the final table. And right now, it feels like the current version of Manchester United under Carrick is leaving points on the table in exactly the games where they should be collecting them most comfortably. The pattern is clear. When the lights are brightest, Carrick gets a response. When the fixture list moves to the less glamorous end, the team's performance levels follow Mbeumo's lead and drop. It is a deeply interesting dynamic. Is Carrick unable to find the same tactical and motivational levers in the smaller games that he finds in the bigger ones? Or is it simpler than that? Is it that his team relies so heavily on Mbeumo's big game quality that when Mbeumo does not fire, there is no contingency plan capable of filling that void? The honest answer is probably a combination of both. And identifying that combination is the work that now needs to be done at the training ground, in the tactical meetings, and in the conversations between manager and player. It is what analysts sometimes describe as a chicken and egg problem. Carrick's team struggles in smaller games, partly because Mbeumo is not at his best. But is Mbeumo not at his best, partly because Carrick is not finding a way to unlock him in those fixtures. The causal arrow could point in either direction. And that ambiguity is the most uncomfortable part of the situation for everyone at the club. What is not ambiguous is the outcome. Manchester United are dropping performance levels in fixtures they should be approaching with confidence. And until that problem is solved, the 1 loss in 8 record, impressive as it is, carries an asterisk of its own. What the club and Mbeumo both need to do, the situation now calls for honesty from multiple directions, and it is worth walking through each one carefully. For Mbeumo, the soul-searching the evidence suggests he needs to do is about understanding what activates his best performance. Because that activation is real, it exists. The goals against City and Arsenal are proof that he is capable of functioning at the highest level. The question is whether that level can be made available on a weekly basis rather than only on the biggest occasions. The work here is partly mental and partly physical. If fatigue is a factor, the conversation needs to happen about rotation, about whether playing the full 90 minutes in every fixture is actually the best way to extract maximum value from his contributions over the course of a full season. If the mental arousal is the issue, that is a different conversation, but an equally important one. Elite players at elite clubs are expected to manufacture their own intensity even when the external occasion does not supply it. The great players in football history have always been able to do that. To look at a fixture that the world has written off as routine and still find the hunger, still find the edge, still find the application that produces a decisive moment, that is the level Manchester United need Mbeumo to reach. And the evidence right now suggests he is not there yet in those quieter moments. For Carrick, the challenge is tactical and psychological in equal measure. He needs to find a way to make his team competitive regardless of the size of the occasion. That means having a game plan that does not rely on peak Mbeumo to function. It means having alternative routes to creating and taking chances. It means having a structure that is difficult to play against even when the individual brilliance is not flowing. Because the current setup, one where the team's quality rises and falls so directly with one player's form, is not a system. It is a reliance. And reliance on a single player, however gifted, is always a vulnerability. Now let us pivot. Because alongside the Mbeumo story, there is another story developing at Old Trafford right now that deserves equal attention. And it is in many ways the most remarkable story at the club this season. Harry Maguire is about to sign a contract extension at Manchester United. Take a moment with that. Because if you had said those words in 2021 or 2022, the reaction from most corners of the football world would have been disbelief. Not because Maguire is a bad person, not because he lacks professionalism, but because the noise around him during that period was so loud, so relentless, and so damaging that it became almost impossible to separate the player from the discourse. How Maguire became the symbol of an era. The situation is one that begins with Ed Woodward and the Glazer regime. In the summer of 2019, Manchester United paid Leicester City £80 million for Harry Maguire. The full fee, up front, no add-ons, no instalments, no performance-related spread, £80 million paid in full for a centre-back. That number became a target painted on Maguire's back before he had even played a single game in a Manchester United shirt. And to be fair to the early version of his United career, Maguire did contribute meaningfully under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. He played well, he was reliable, he brought a presence and a leadership quality to the backline that the squad needed at that point. The fee was always going to be the headline, but the early performances justified the investment on a football level. But then the Norwegian spell began to crater. And as Manchester United's performances got worse, as the results got uglier, as the pressure on the squad mounted, Maguire became the lightning rod. He became the focal point for every frustration, every criticism, every moment of doubt about the club's direction. The reality for the club during that period was that the problems were systemic. They were structural, they ran from the boardroom to the training pitch and back again. But the way football discourse works, it needed a face. It needed someone to carry the weight of the dysfunction. And somehow, Maguire ended up carrying it. There was a time when he was genuinely close to leaving, when the noise around his situation was so negative, so sustained, that departure seemed not just possible, but likely. That is how dark the chapter got, the mental fortitude that changed everything. But here is what happened. He stayed. He fought. He did not hide. That is the part of the Maguire story that deserves to be told loudly and clearly. Because the easy path in football, when the criticism reaches that level, is to request a transfer, to take the move that gets you out of the firing line and into a quieter environment. Plenty of players have done it. Plenty of players have made that choice. And in many cases, that choice is entirely understandable. And Maguire made a different choice. He stayed at Manchester United through some of the hardest professional years any player at that club has experienced in recent memory. And he rebuilt. The evidence suggests that what carried him through was something fundamental to who he is as a footballer. His game was never based on the physical attributes that decline with age. He was never a player who relied on pace and explosiveness to dominate. His value was always in his intelligence, his positioning, his reading of the game, his ability to organise and communicate, his leadership in the backline, And those qualities, the evidence now clearly shows, are not declining with age. They are increasing with experience. Maguire is aging in the way that intelligent, technically sound defenders age. He is getting better at the things that made him good in the first place. And the things that the critics used to expose about him, the pace, the agility in tight spaces, were always less central to his game than the narrative around him suggested. Under multiple managers in recent years, Maguire has fought his way back to relevance, back to the starting 11, back to a position of genuine importance in the squad. And now, under Michael Carrick, he has taken that final step. He is not just in the starting 11, he is the first name on the team sheet. What this means for Ineos in the summer of 2026, here is where the situation becomes a genuine test of principles for Ineos. Their approach to contracts and wages is well established. They are not in the business of handing significant extensions to players over 30. They are careful with wages. They are strategic about commitments. That is the philosophy that has driven their model at Manchester United since they took control. Harry Maguire is north of 30. He is on significant wages. By every measure of their stated policy, he should be a player they are moving away from, not extending. And yet the situation on the ground at Old Trafford is making that philosophical position very difficult to hold. Because Manchester United do not look solid without Harry Maguire in their backline, that is the blunt truth of what is being established right now. Carrick has built his defensive structure around Maguire's intelligence and experience. The centre-back partnership, whatever form it takes, functions better with Maguire as its anchor. The team is more difficult to beat. The defensive shape is cleaner. The communication across the backline is more authoritative. That is not sentiment. That is observable on-pitch reality. And it is taking the contract decision increasingly out of Ineos' hands. The practical reality for the club is that replacing what Maguire provides at this moment in their development would require either significant investment in a new centre-back of similar quality or a period of adjustment and instability while a younger replacement finds their footing. Neither of those options is attractive heading into a summer where multiple other positions also need addressing urgently. Midfield is an area of urgent need. Fullback positions need investment. The winger role requires attention. The list of summer priorities is already long. Adding a central defensive rebuild to that list because they chose not to extend a player who is performing well and wants to stay would be a self-inflicted wound. The evidence strongly suggests Ineos will make the pragmatic choice. They will offer an extension. The wages are expected to drop significantly from his current level, which makes the financial side of the decision easier to manage. And in doing so, they will turn one of Ed Woodward's most criticised decisions into something that actually ends with the player spending close to a decade at the club. That is an extraordinary full-circle moment. The £80 million mistake. The lightning rod. The player who once seemed to represent everything wrong with the transfer policy at Manchester United, signing a new deal in the summer of 2026 on his own terms, on the back of his own performances, forcing the club's hand through merit rather than sentiment. If it happens, and the evidence strongly suggests it will be one of the great comeback stories in Premier League history. So let us bring this together. Because both of these stories, Mbeumo's form decline and Maguire's remarkable rehabilitation, are actually telling us the same thing about where Manchester United are right now. They are a club in transition, under an interim manager navigating fixtures with a squad that contains both extraordinary talent and significant vulnerability. The extraordinary talent shows up brilliantly in the big moments and disappears in the quieter ones. The significant vulnerability is masked when everything is clicking and exposed when the system is under pressure. And Mbeumo represents both of those things. He is the extraordinary talent whose inconsistency is the vulnerability, and Carrick, to his credit, is managing a difficult situation without the full tools at his disposal. And Maguire, by contrast, represents what sustained professionalism can produce. A player who was written off, who absorbed enormous pressure, who stayed and fought, and who has now become genuinely indispensable to the manager currently in charge. The lesson that sits between both stories is a simple one. Football rewards consistency over time. The player who produces the occasional moment of brilliance will always attract attention. But the player who shows up, prepares properly, maintains their standards, and contributes reliably across a full season is the one who ultimately earns the trust of the club and becomes genuinely irreplaceable. Maguire has clearly learned that lesson. The question now is whether Mbeumo can learn it too. Because if he can find a way to translate his big game quality into weekly application, into the kind of consistent threat that leaves defenders worried in every fixture, not just the marquee ones, then Manchester United will have something genuinely special. And if Carrick can find a way to unlock that consistency while also building a system that does not rise and fall entirely on one player's form, then the 1-loss-in-8 record that currently feels like an achievement will start to look like a baseline, a floor rather than a ceiling. That is the version of Manchester United that this club and its supporters are waiting for. The building blocks are here: Maguire's experience, Mbeumo's talent, Carrick's understanding of the club's DNA. The question is whether they can be assembled into something consistent enough to matter when the final table is drawn up. That is the story right now at Old Trafford, and United HQ will be here every step of the way to break it all down for you. If you made it to the end of this video, you already know what this channel is about. Real analysis, real depth, no filler, no agenda. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now. Hit the bell notification so you never miss a video, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do you make of Mbeumo's form? Do you think Carrick can fix it? And is Maguire the most underrated story of this entire season? Let me know. I read every single comment, and I will see you in the next one.